Christians have just been lazy with the gospel, and they took the easy way out by attaching themselves to the state, to the political gospel. That's why the political gospel is so appealing. We don't have to go evangelize our enemies, quote unquote, or the left. We just simply have to have policies that aren't in their favor, laws and policies that aren't in their favor. And it's gotten us into a mess. We don't even realize that we're so blind to it. So I want to talk about something that is, it's an important subject, especially in light of the recent rise of Christian nationalism, and especially in light of recent events that have seemed to have galvanized more the Christian nationalist position. And if you're not familiar with what that might be, it's basically, there's been books written on it, there's been tons of discussion about this, but basically what you've got is a merger, essentially, just in general terms, a merger of church and state. And what Christian nationalist proponents want to do, or try to do, is to establish Christianity from a top-down perspective. In other words, they want a Christian prince to direct the affairs of the state in line with Christian principles. Okay, so that is, let's see, what would that be? That would be classic Erastianism. So that's an Erastian principle. In other words, where the state is in charge of the church, more or less. So they wouldn't go so far as to say, well, the state can't tell you how to worship, but it's just a logical connection. It's a logical step in that, to go from dictating morality or promoting Christian principles and values to telling you how to worship. And then we might ask, well, how can we make that connection? How can we say that that's the logical end of that, is to dictate to church how they're supposed to worship? Well, because it's happened over and over again in history. And this is one of the great fallacies and the great holes in the discussion of Christian nationalism, is just their failure to give an honest treatment to history. Like, I just don't understand how this happens. I mean, it's so plain to see. You don't even have to dig for this. You can easily go back and you can see the dangers that happens when the church and state mix. And sometimes the church, and by the way, let me back up. When I use the term church, I don't actually agree with how it's used in modern parlance and modern language. I don't like how it's used as just a general collection of all the things that appear to be Christianity, or Christianity in name only, or professing Christians, or professing countries that claim to be Christian. Like this, I've got a whole entire section, like, I don't know, maybe, goodness, 2-3 dozen posts on my website, voiceoftrueblog.com, that deal with this discussion of the church. In fact, I have a whole entire series that I devoted several years ago, to the theory of the universal church, the development of the theory of the universal church, and just to show how that entire statement is a fallacy, that entire construction is a fallacy. Not to mention, I also wrote a book called What is Church? And it goes through the meaning of this term and how it's loaded. It's not, church is just an English translation that's given to the word ecclesia in Scripture. And an ecclesia is most often used in a setting of simply when believers gather together. Because ecclesia isn't a specifically religious or Christian word. In fact, in Acts chapter 19, ecclesia is used 3 times to refer to just a general gathering. It was the people that gathered together in Ephesus, and they were on the verge of rioting, and it mentions that word 3 times in a non-religious setting. So ecclesia was just the Greek word that was used for a gathering, and most often it refers to an actual physical gathering of believers when they get together. Sometimes it can refer to, though less so, to a geographical area where believers would meet, such as the churches of Galatia. So I just wanted to point that out because I use that word a lot and have been using it a lot on these Notes from the Pulpit editions. Again, we're mobile in the truck, so if you hear stuff, that's just me driving. You hear my tires. But anyway, I just wanted to define that and let you know that I'm using that term the way that it's used a lot today, but I don't agree with how that's been constructed. But anyway, so what they want to see is, what they fail to do, rather, is they fail to look at history. So when the church is over top of the state, that's papalism. That's the classic papal system, Roman Catholic, and then the opposite of that would be when the state is over the church, and that's the Erastianism that I just mentioned. And what Christian nationalists want, if you read Stephen Wolf's book on Christian nationalism, which it's, just to be honest, it's kind of a mess. Like, it's just logical fallacy after logical fallacy. But you'll see that they want a Christian prince, and they want to do a top-down. It didn't happen this way in the New Testament. No one in the New Testament, we went through this the last Notes from the Pulpit, but no one in the New Testament, including Jesus himself, sought to overthrow the government and have a top-down governmental structure under which the church was supposed to be submitting to the state, or at least the state was going to regulate the morality and affairs of the society in line with the church. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. You can't legislate those type of things. Jesus' kingdom is in and amongst our midst, but it is an internal kingdom. While it's physical and internal both. Okay, so the gospel, wherever the gospel spreads, the kingdom has arrived. And that doesn't mean that everybody in that particular area is going to be saved. Now, the kingdom does have a change that happens internally through the work of the Holy Spirit, and then also manifests itself outwardly in changes that happen in culture and society. But these things that they're saying, it just never happened. Like, nobody tried to get a Christian Herod in charge of Israel under Roman rule, or no one tried to get a Christian Caesar up until Constantine, that is. So it's just crazy. But that's not going to be the emphasis of this post necessarily, to walk through history. I mean, we can do that in another episode. Maybe I can take some of those books that I've written and kind of walk through them and show how this thing it's not historically supported. But what I do want to talk about, and do want to draw our attention to, is this controversial idea that the United States is a Christian nation. And the reason why I say it's controversial is it has been made and manufactured to be controversial. Like, I hope everybody by now understands that we're being pushed and pulled and manipulated in multiple directions to create division. So on the one hand, you would have those who would argue against any historic founding or basis of the United States as a Christian nation. And on the other hand, you have those who are strongly promoting it and want to see it, quote, that way again, like I just mentioned, where the church directs morality or legislates morality, but doesn't necessarily involve itself in the worship of the church, which is logical fallacy, because the conclusion of that would be that they will. Anyway, so this controversy, I don't know exactly how far it goes back, but I do remember Obama talking about the United States is not a Christian nation, and if it was, it's not anymore. And then he goes on to mock the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5, chapter through 7, and say it's so controversial, it's so radical, our own Department of Defense couldn't even implement it. Like, come on, this is stupid. But on the one hand, though, he kind of is pointing out how impossible it would be to join church and state. Like, if you're going to actually do that, like, what, you can't do it. You can't legislate the Sermon on the Mount from a governmental position. Like, that's insane. But anyway, here we are. So what I wanted to point out is that Martyn Lloyd-Jones, I guess I would say my all-time favorite preacher, do I want to say all-time favorite author? Maybe. If not, John Owen. They are very close. Or Thomas Watson. They are very, very close together. Lloyd-Jones, I know he may not embrace me as an apprentice or someone that he would be mentoring, but I would look up to him as such, and either look up to him as almost like a father or grandfather type figure, but definitely like a mentor. I mean, he's influenced a lot of my thinking. He influenced my thinking on the church through several of his writings, and just me making connections in what he was teaching to come up with my own understanding of church and what that means. But he has a series. He has an app as well. So the MLJ Trust, Martyn Lloyd-Jones Trust, has an app that you can download for your phone or tablet or whatever. They also have a YouTube channel where it has all of his sermons on there, and they're actually finding more of these sermons fairly regularly. Some of them have had poor audio quality that they've had to remaster, or some of them have just been lost. Unfortunately, not everything that he's written is in sermon format, and not everything that he's preached is in written format. But his sermons on church and state can be found most clearly on the app or his YouTube channel, and they're in his Romans commentary, specifically the volume on chapter 13 of Romans. But I don't know, I have a hard time trying to find like where the actual sermons are. So I'm not sure if his sermon messages have been broken up into multiple chapters for Romans, because some of his other things, like on 1 John, his chapters in the 1 John commentary are actual sermons. You can find them and almost read them word for word. But the Romans, it's just not as clear all the time to me. So I'm not really sure if there was something in the editing process that happened there or what. But anyway, what you're looking for is his 6 or 7 part series on church and state. And it's in the Romans 13 section. You may have to read all of that. He's got multiple other messages that he's given on church and state. He's got one from Ephesians chapter 4. There are maybe one called Lessons from Church History. That's found in a volume that he has called Knowing the Times. I would recommend that book along with the book called Puritans, relatively newish publication, I think from Banner of Truth. Basically grabbed some of his more popular Puritan paper talks, the Puritan Conference. And there's a whole entire series on Puritan papers from all of the talks from those that I think are published under his name too. But in this Church and State series, especially number 3. So Church and State, episode number 3, sermon number 3, however you'd like to phrase that, according to the app or YouTube channel, it's number 3. What he does there, and in fact, this whole entire series, that whole entire Church and State series, it is going to disprove Christian nationalism. And he's doing it 60 years before Christian nationalism even came about in the way that it's being the modern representation of that. It just is. He's going to walk through historically, he's going to walk through theologically, and he would, if you take what he's saying and apply it today, you would see 100% Christian nationalism is unbiblical, unscriptural, and it cannot be supported historically. Like, it just can't. Every time it's ever tried to happen or come close to happening, it has been a monumental failure. But in this episode 3, or part 3, whatever you want to say, of the Church and State, what he does is fascinating. He actually addresses, for just in the first few minutes of the sermon or message, he talks about the United States and its formation as a, quote, Christian country. And then the rest of that message is kind of devoted to it a little bit, but really what he's highlighting is some of the changes that happened in the United States and England to the efforts of getting out from under the thumb of England and their church, their state church that they had in England. So in listening to that, I reminded myself again that when we come to express the concept of the United States being a Christian nation today, we fall into a couple ditches on this. Okay, so the one hand, those who say that the United States was not, I don't want to even say founded. Let's not go 1776 right here. Let's go earlier. Let's go to 1600s, and let's go to Massachusetts. Let's go to the original voyage that had come over and stressed up these colonies and those sorts of things. Okay, we're going to look at that. We're going to talk about that first because that's what Lloyd-Jones does. And what he points out is that who he calls the Pilgrim Fathers, they are tired of the Church of England telling them how they're going to worship. Okay, so they've had enough of this. It's led to persecution, ostracism. Basically, we're moving on. All right, so they decide first of all, to go to the Netherlands, and they set up some Dutch colonies there. And it goes reasonably well, I think, for a little bit, but eventually and they're going to be marginalized. They're trying to escape the persecution of the Church of England that we're trying to actually enact church discipline at the state level, which is the big problem. And so we're talking 1620s, maybe a little bit before that, when all this happens. So eventually, of course, we know that these Pilgrim Fathers decide, it's not enough for this Dutch colony. We want to go to the New World, and we want to be able to worship freely. We want to worship the Lord how we think that He wants to be worshipped, and we want to do so freely without worry of the state coming in and trying to kill us or throw us in jail or whatever the case may be. Okay, so they make this voyage over, and long story short, for that part, they end up establishing colonies, right, like Massachusetts Bay Colony, and then eventually, I think you got Jamestown, the Lost Colony, all up and down the eastern coast. Okay? So from that perspective, you can say I want to say founding, but how would we say this? The inauguration, maybe, of the country, the beginning, the early steps, the birth pains, the birth process, the birth of the United States, was done so from a Christian perspective, without question. There's no question about this. But now don't fall into the other ditch and go, well, you know what? See, we told you. This has been a Christian nation, and it's always been a Christian nation. Because what they didn't go well. They fell into the exact same trap that they left. So when they get tired of the persecution and being told how they're going to worship, and they're going to break free from the Church of England and then start fresh in the United States, they end up doing the exact same thing that they left. They end up requiring, in order for people to vote in Massachusetts, you had to be a member of a church. Now, this brings up a great question. Member of what church? The Anglican Church? Presbyterian? Congregationalist? What church? What are we supposed to believe here? So, the thing that they hated most, I won't say hated, but you know what I'm saying, the thing that they disliked the most, they actually became. They actually created the very thing that they left, and that was the state exercising discipline in churchly matters. I mean, it's just the fact. So, if you want to say that the United States was founded, although remember, I'm not 1776 yet, I'm 1600s. If you want to say that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, that's true. But it was wrong to do so, because it fell into the exact same trap of the government over top of the church, Erastianism. Okay? And if we want to back up a little bit, we know how the Church of England gets started, right? Like, King Henry decides he wants to have a divorce from his wife. The Roman Catholic Church will not grant that divorce because they had a system of papalism, right, where the church is kind of dictating the affairs of the state, not going to let the king get a divorce. So he says, you know what, I'm the sovereign here. I'm going to start my own church. And then he decides he's going to start the Church of England. So now what do we got? We go from the church telling the state what to do to the state telling the church what to do. And the people who broke away, they were called separatists. And then over time, in the 1600s, so 17th century, over time you have some people who are like, you know what, we're separatists. We don't want anything to do with the state whatsoever. All right? And then you kind of got semi-separatists. You have those who are like, well, we're not necessarily going to be quite as radical and flee and go to the New World, but we're just going to basically say softly that we don't want to have any interaction necessarily with the state. We've got the two spheres, and they can interact maybe a little bit. This might be best expressed by Cromwell, maybe. I think in England we might say he's semi-separatist, maybe. But what ends up happening is those who don't take the separatist position, guess what happens? Well, in 1662, you've got what is commonly known as the Great Ejection. And the Puritans, I thought the number was around 1,000, but Lloyd-Jones said around 2,000. So don't fact check me there, but it is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 preachers were all kicked out of their church on the same day. And that's called the Great Ejection. And the reason why they were kicked out is because the state was trying to tell the church how it was that they were supposed to worship. And that was to include the Book of Common Prayer. That was to include maybe certain set sermons that they were supposed to preach through. And on the one hand, I think Cromwell was involved in this too, but on the one hand, Lloyd-Jones points out that he understands where they were coming from, because basically all the preachers, not the Puritans, but a lot of the preachers were just stupid. They were completely ignorant of Scripture. They were completely ignorant of anything spiritual whatsoever. And so they wanted to have some consistency across the board. And they also wanted to be sure that the people in the pew, more or less, were getting a proper message. So the state determined that they were going to regulate that by saying, this is your standard thing that you're going to say. This is your standard practice, you got to use this common book of prayer that everybody's using. And the Puritans, who by no means whatsoever were ignorant or stupid, brilliant men, all of them, across the board, I have no problem making that statement. Some were more brilliant than others, but brilliant, genius level brilliance. They're not standing for that whatsoever. So to kind of bring this back together and kind of tie this up into a nice bow, this controversial statement that the United States is a Christian nation, we've got to get back to that. And then you see Christian nationalism hitching their wagons to that horse right there, and they're saying, yeah, see, all we're trying to do is what the Founding Fathers did. Well, you take it a step too far now, because by the time you get to the 1700s, you're so influenced with deism, you can't make that statement. That's not wise to do. So we're mixing periods together. We're mixing 1600s and 1700s together. We're mixing ideas, and we're not understanding the full consequences of things. We're looking at that founding, that 1600s founding that I was talking about, as a positive when it wasn't. Like, it led to huge issues, to major issues. And of course, if we were to keep going down this journey, we would lead to Roger Williams and the founding of Rhode Island, and the Christian nationalists. They can't stand that guy. Roger Williams was a genius also. Lloyd-Jones points out that he was so smart and so logical that he took his logical conclusions too far. And by doing so, he found out towards the end of the life that he couldn't get along with anybody. Roger, buddy, I'm almost right there with you. I can sympathize with that. What Lloyd-Jones means is that Roger Williams had been kind of studying Scripture and kind of seeing, what is this ecclesiology supposed to look like? It can't be Erastianism, and it certainly can't be papalism. So what's it supposed to look like? And then towards the end, Roger Williams is just like, yeah, well, we're out. I'm out. I can't find anybody that I'm going to get along with, so just forget it. But the Christian nationalists, they use Roger Williams as a whipping boy, and they'll just abuse him up one side and down the other. But he founded the state of Rhode Island, essentially. And he'd been kicked out of Boston, and he'd been kicked out of Salem. And actually, because the state was in charge of church affairs at this time, they were going to deport him. They were going to send Roger Williams back to England. We're tired of you being here, buddy. You're just causing too many problems. So, was the United States founded, and by that I mean 1600s, as a Christian nation? Yeah, the colonists came over so that they could worship freely. But the problem is they ended up doing the exact same thing as the Church of England where they left, where the government was over top of or exercising discipline over the affairs of the church. And the exact same thing is going to happen today. The Christian nationalists, by the way, let me just point out, without getting too far down a rabbit hole because my drive, I got a few minutes left, but there are a lot of people who have embedded themselves in this Christian nationalist movement who are plants. I hope people realize this. They are plants. What I mean is, they are there as agitators to get this Christian nationalist movement momentum. Okay, this has been going on for a few years now, and I hope you all can recognize what's happening, that this is a plot and a ploy. And the end goal of this ploy right here. Everything that's been happening, including the things that you've seen over the last couple of weeks. This isn't, I'm not talking conspiracy level stuff. I'm not going there. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Okay? I've been writing about this for a decade and a half. What's going to happen? What always happens is that Christians have the bullseye on their back. True, genuine Christians will have the bullseye on your back. The devil doesn't care about people who aren't saved. And he doesn't care about people who aren't hearing the true message of the gospel. He wants to destroy Christians. He wants to destroy that, to keep Christianity from spreading and to, in an attempt to harm God. Like, that's his goal. So he doesn't have to go and try to deceive Muslims or Hindu or Jews or any that. Like, don't think that he has to go do that. He actually doesn't even have to go and try to deceive pagans. They love sin so much, you don't have to worry about them. What he wants to do is he wants to cause Christians, or at least those who are professing Christians, to blaspheme God, to leave God. He wants to kill them, whatever. He wants to persecute. This is what Revelation, let's see, was it 13? Chapter 13? Don't quote me on this, but where the woman flees from the dragon into the wilderness for 1,260 days. That's what this is about. Satan's trying to get the church. He wants to kill the church. He wants to kill Christians. Fact. So there have been a lot of agitators who have embedded themselves in this movement. And I've written on this before too, but what they've done is they grabbed hold of a movement that was already in existence, okay? This is what Christian nationalism has done. They grabbed hold of a movement that was in existence, and that movement was MAGA. And MAGA, hands down, was a powerful movement. If you claim to be MAGA and you throw any support towards President Trump or his policies or his people or whatever the case may be, they'll embrace you. You show up to an event, it doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what gender you claim, although there's only two. They show up with a red MAGA hat, they will embrace you as family. They are, I don't know how you say it, like a genuine, warm, and welcoming people on that aspect of it. So what Christian nationalism did is they sought to prey upon the MAGA movement that was loosely Christian, all right, we might say. So they just co-opted it right on in. And so now the media, they look at MAGA as a Christian nationalist movement, especially since you've got Trump, who first and second term, right, brings in Paula White, brings in pastors who are praying over him, and most of these pastors that he has surrounding him are from the New Apostolic Reformation. That's a subject for another day, but they're going to be of the charismatic televangelist variety. This should be a big warning to us, because that's prosperity gospel is linking arms with the political gospel that I talked about last time. And so what Christian nationalists did is they saw an opportunity to co-opt a movement, all right? And they kind of did it from not a top down necessarily, but from a bottom or middle up. And there are people, I don't necessarily need to name their names. I named some names last time, although I'll just say his name. I got Joel Webbin's name wrong. I don't know what made me say Joel Webber. I was thinking of an author, I think, Timothy Webber. Great books that he's written, but Joel Webbin was the name that I messed up on last time. Anyway, that's Christian nationalism. We'll talk about that maybe more in depth another time, but it is it's a movement that I've written about. Lots of people have. And I've been warning about this for a while now too. I actually thought it was going to lose momentum. I don't know what made me think that. That was dumb. But I thought it was going to lose momentum, and it didn't. They doubled and tripled down. In fact, not to bring up another subject completely, to go down another trail, but Charlie Kirk's memorial service was the example of the political gospel being on display. And that political gospel that we have front and center right now is Christian nationalism. And why I'm saying that is because at that memorial service, you had, 10, 15 members of Trump's cabinet who were there, and not just there, but speaking, and then also doing their best to speak the gospel in some way. it's setting us up, man. It's not good. It's not going to be good. Because what's going to happen, to bring back to my earlier point about persecution on the Christians, what will end up happening is you get this political gospel that's hitched itself to Christianity, right? And so as long as they're in power, everything looks good for the most part. That I suppose at some point they could dictate how it is that one's supposed to worship, but I don't think they will. What will actually happen is when they lose power, then everyone on the left side that they've been marginalizing and calling demons and saying that you're never going to forgive them and you don't want the best for them and all of this stuff, all this talk, this vitriolic talk, it's going to come back to get the Christians. It's not going to come back to get those cabinet members, because all they have to do is say, well, we're not really Christian. Like, all they have to do is deny the faith. I mean, it's easy for them. Get out of jail free card. But the genuine true Christians will now be persecuted and marginalized because they hitch their wagon to that. And so then when this whole thing shifts around, because it will, Republicans aren't going to be in power forever. That never happens like this. As soon as it shifts, they're going to come for Christians. And I think we're probably, I don't know, things are going to start getting pretty bad in the AI world and maybe economic world. So it's going to have to set up some turmoil there before the left gets back a hold of the reins. And remember, left, right, it doesn't really matter. It's all one big party. We're not in it. So what we see appearance-wise, left, right, it's one system. But what's going to end up happening is, like I said, is that they're going to come for Christians. In fact, you may have seen Hillary Clinton talking the other day on TV and saying that the biggest threat that we have right now is don't forget about the white part. They're going to tag that on there. The white Christian nationalist movement is the biggest threat to our democracy. See what happens? That's because what happened? The perceived right was picking fights with the perceived left and calling them names and calling them demons, and that gets the people worked up. And the people who are professing to be Christians are like, yeah, let's get them. And then what happens? Everybody leaves, and who's standing there in the middle? The perceived Christians, or those who are Christians, and that's when the persecution starts. It's so predictable. I mean, I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. I will nearly guarantee it. It doesn't mean that it's prophetic. It just means you just have to look at history and go, well, it's going to repeat itself. We're going to get ourselves right back into the same boat that we always do. The reason why this happened, by the way, and this could be where I wrap this thing up, but the reason why this happens is because Christians, and here I'm using it loosely, as those who genuinely are, and then those who may be in name only, but Christians have gotten lazy with the gospel. Just like I said in the last Notes from the Pulpit, how Christian nationalists have denied the power of the gospel, that the gospel actually can stand on its own. Christians have gotten lazy with the gospel. They have. They want the state to solve their problems via policies and laws, but not. They don't want to. They don't want to do the hard work of evangelism, the hard work of preaching the gospel. They want to leave it up to the state, and they're like, you know what? Hey, we just want our comfortable life. We want to live the American dream, and we don't want to be bothered by Democrats and liberals and people with purple hair. That's what they want. They want to have. The goalposts are moving on all of the agenda as far as abortion and gay marriage, as though that's an even real name. I mean, the state can't determine what marriage is. They can't define that, so it's a non-issue. But anyway, just to wrap this up, but that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen and what has happened. Christians have just been lazy with the gospel, and they took the easy way out by attaching themselves to the state, to the political gospel. That's why the political gospel is so appealing. We don't have to go evangelize our enemies, quote unquote, or the left. We just simply have to have policies that aren't in their favor, laws and policies that aren't in their favor. And it's gotten us into a mess. We don't even realize that we're so blind to it. But there we go. That was a long-winded explanation and diatribe on Lloyd-Jones's message, Church and State, Part 3, about how was the United States actually founded as a Christian nation in the 1600s. It was, but they ended up becoming the exact same thing, the exact thing that they left in England. And that was an Erastian system where the state was essentially over top of or enacting discipline on the church. And that's wrong. and unscriptural. All right, we'll catch you on the next one.